I'd like to share an Old Testament prophecy from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 9. And there are two tribes of Israel on the northern border that were by the Sea of Galilee, and they were heavily influenced by the Gentiles, and they had kind of wandered from God's ways, and they were walking in a spiritual darkness. And so I read from verse 1. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time he has made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. This is the message of our Christmas. There is darkness. And I want to share the story of one such time of darkness. And it was a Harvard professor, a poet, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and his wife had those big dresses back in the 1850s. They were huge, like Mayfate dresses. And she was lighting a candle, and the hot wax fell on that cotton, burst into flame. That huge dress burst into flame and killed her. So he's in sorrow. Then he told his son, the Civil War's on, don't go. Too many people are dying. And his son said this. His son wrote a letter March the 14th, 1863. He said, Charles said, my first duty is to do what I can for my country, and I would willingly lay down my life for it if it would be of any good. So he became a lieutenant, but in November he was severely wounded, and it wasn't known if he was going to live or die. So Longfellow is grieving for his wife, worried about his son, and the war has been terrible. There have been so many casualties, and he's going to make a reference in his poem about General Lee's cannon. At the Gettysburg Battle, the cannon that the Confederacy fired upon the Union troops was the greatest bombardment in human history to that time. Fortunately, they overshot the Union line, and so when Pickett's charge came up, the soldiers were basically intact. But this is what he wrote. I heard the bells on Christmas Day their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat, of peace on earth, goodwill to men, and thought how as the day had come, the belfries of all Christendom had rolled along the unbroken song of peace on earth, goodwill to men, till ringing, singing on its way, the world revolved from night to day, a voice, a chime, a chant sublime of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And then he's going to talk about the cannon, from each accursed mouth, the cannon thundered in the south. And with the sound, the carols drowned of peace on earth, goodwill to men. It was as if an earthquake rent the hearthstones of a continent. And the hearthstones were in front of the fireplace where families would gather. And it made forlorn the houses born of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. And he gets word that his boy's going to live. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. And there is a darkness. Earlier this month, for the 21st time, I had the privilege of participating in a memorial service when people could gather and light candles in memory and honor of ones who died in the past year or recent years. And everybody, when I face and give my talk, everybody is sad because they lost a grandma, a grandpa, a son or daughter, a husband or a wife, a brother or sister. And it's such a moving time. But the point is this: Christmas means that love can continue. And I didn't really know that when I was in 8th grade, when my mom died. When the Christmas tree, the lights didn't sparkle that year. But the message, what you want to get across is, the light does shine. The love of your loved one still continues. Love is forever, it says in 1 Corinthians 13. And that love shines upon us from our family and from Jesus. And they know of our love, is the promise of the Bible. And so, love continues. Now, in the Gospel of John, John talks about light. And it's just such a wonderful teaching. In Jesus, reading from the first chapter, was light, life. And the life of Jesus was the light of men. Now, how could that be? That Jesus gives us light to show us how to live, to show us how to love, to show us that God is our heavenly parent, to show us that we're sisters and brothers of Jesus. And he goes on to say, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And that's the true meaning. Whatever darkness that we go through in life, and as a pastor, I would say the one thing I've been shocked the most about in all the years of my ministry is how many tough things are out there. How much darkness there is in illnesses, in broken relationships, in suffering with death. There's much darkness out there, more than I ever dreamed. But the light shines in the darkness. And that gives us the strength, because the Christmas means Emmanuel, God is with us. I'd like to read from John chapter 8. And Jesus makes a proclamation in the temple in Jerusalem. He says to the whole crowd, I am the light of the world. That's a promise. And I'm wearing a promise stole. This is made in Guatemala by the natives there. It's a free trade product. But the idea is that the rainbow promise, the promises of God are here for us. And Jesus says, here's the promise, I'm the light for the world, which includes you and me. It's a light for us. Then he says this, whoever follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. Then in John chapter 10, he goes on to say that Jesus' light can guide us and help us. I came that they may have life and have it in abundance. What Jesus wants for us is not to take away joy or life, but to give us love, joy, and peace, eternal peace and joy. And the key to all this is receiving love from Jesus and then giving that love to our world. And then Jesus goes on to say in John chapter 12, a wonderful, wonderful promise. He promises that when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. Then he says, the light is among you for a little while. Walk while you have the light, lest the darkness overtake you. The one who walks in the darkness does not know where he's going. Now here's what he wants us to do. While you have the light, the love of Jesus, while you have the light, believe in that love, believe in that light, that you may become daughters and sons of light. These are wonderful promises, that what God is saying is that we're to walk as children of light, and that means there's a possibility that other people will find a helping hand, a listening ear, a comforting word, a shoulder perhaps to cry on through you, because you become light to others. And you do that. You are a light to others, and you make such a difference for good. I want to share with you my very, outside the Bible, stories of Christmas, my very favorite Christmas story. And it's such a moving story. And I want to remind you how there is darkness. And it's called The Christmas I Remember Best. by Ruma West. She lived out west outside a small town. And listen to the darkness that came to her and her family. And she said it should have been the worst, the bleakest of Christmases. I mean, if you thought about it, it should be the worst. It turned out to be the loveliest of all my life. I was 9 years old, one of 7 children. We lived in a little farming town. It had been a tragic year for all of us, but we still had our father, and it made all the difference. Each year in our town, a Christmas Eve social was held at the church. How well I remember Dad buttoning our coats, placing us all on our long homemade sleigh, and pulling us to church about a mile away. Now, why would Dad pull the sleigh? Well, we're going to see this. It was snowing. How cold and good it felt on our faces. We held tight to one another. Above the crunch of snow beneath Dad's feet, we could hear him whistling softly, Silent Night. Now here's the darkness. Mama had died the previous summer. She had been confined to bed for 3 years. So Dad had assumed all mother and father responsibilities. I remember Dad standing me on a stool by our big round kitchen table and teaching me to mix bread. But my main task was being Mama's hands and feet until that day in June on her own birthday when she died. Darkness now continues. 2 months later came the big fire. Our barn, our sheds, our haystacks, our livestock were all destroyed. What happens when the cattle and the pigs and the other livestock is gone? Livestock's gone. The hay's gone. That was their income. That was their financial reversal here. It was a calamity, she says. But Dad stood between us and disaster. We were not even aware of how poor we were, but we had no money at all. I don't remember much about Christmas Eve social. I just remember Dad pulling us there and pulling us back. Later, in the front room, around our pot-bellied stove, he served us. Now, this is the dinner. He served us warm milk and bread. Bread and milk. Our Christmas tree, topped by a little worn cardboard angel, had been brought from the nearby hills. Strings of homegrown popcorn made it the most beautiful tree I had ever seen or smelled. After supper, Dad made all 7 of us kids sit in a half circle by the tree. I remember I wore a long flannel nightgown. He sat on the floor facing us and told us he was ready to give us our Christmas gift. Okay, here comes the light. We waited, puzzled, because we thought Christmas presents were for Christmas morning. Dad looked at our expectant faces. Long ago, he said, on a night like this, some poor shepherds were watching their sheep on a lonely hillside, when all of a sudden, his quiet voice went on and on, telling the story of the Christ child in his own simple words. I'll never forget how love and gratitude seemed to fill the room. There was light from the oil lamp and warmth from the stove. But somehow it was more than that. We felt Mama's presence. And we learned that loving someone was far more important than having something. I want to repeat that. This is light. We learned that loving someone was far more important than having something. We were filled with peace and happiness and joy. When the story was ended, Dad had us all kneel for a family prayer. And then he said, now here's more light. Try to remember when everything else seems to be lost, the greatest thing of all remains, God's love for us. That's what Christmas means. That's the gift that can never be taken away. The barn was gone, the animals were gone. That was the gift that couldn't be taken away. That's the light. The next morning, we found that Dad had whittled little presents out of wood for each of us and hung them on a tree. Wooden dolls for the girls, wooden whistles for the boys. But he was right. He has given us the real gift the night before. The pastor who wrote O Little Town of Bethlehem, he was sent off in December by his church to go to the Holy Land. He was so upset, so brokenhearted, because all the casualties of the Civil War were before him. Women dressed in black because their son was killed, their husband was killed, their father was killed, people without arms and legs, and they sent him to the Holy Land. On Christmas Eve, he got on a horse. This is back in 1865, right when the war was over, and he rode into Bethlehem. There's no lights. The stars in that high sky were just shining so bright. And he wrote that wonderful song with a message about Bethlehem. In thy dark streets shineth the everlasting light. That's the message of Christmas. The light's with us. Then the closing verse of that song is a prayer. O holy child of Bethlehem, descend to us, we pray. Cast out our sin and enter in. Be born in us today. Amen.